In a remote resort, a powerful man accidentally walked into a room that wasn't his. On the other side of the door, the past was waiting, silently, with eyes identical to his. A system glitch revealed deep wounds, forgotten memories, and a truth too big to ignore. What seemed like a simple reunion turned into a twist that would change 4 lives forever. Before you hear this unforgettable story, don't forget to subscribe for more tales that warm and shake your heart. The night breeze carried the salty scent of the ocean as Michael Reynolds walked along the wooden walkways of the resort. His steps were slow, almost dragging, reflecting the accumulated fatigue after negotiations that had stretched on for hours. His Italian tie was loosened, his hair slightly disheveled by the tropical breeze that swayed the surrounding palm trees. The golden access card weighed in his fingers as he observed it under the soft light of the lampposts. Suite 2-47. The number had been engraved in his mind since check-in, but something about the card's color seemed different. Perhaps it was just fatigue playing tricks on his perception. Michael was a man accustomed to details. At 42, he had built a business empire based on precision and control of every variable. But that night, all he wanted was the silence of his room, a hot shower, and the temporary forgetfulness of the figures dancing in his mind. The suite was on the 3rd floor in a more secluded wing of the resort. The corridor was dimly lit, illuminated only by small lights embedded in the floor. The sound of his footsteps on the marble echoed softly, creating a melancholic soundtrack for his thoughts. As he inserted the card into the electronic lock, Michael noticed a hesitation in the system. The red light flashed twice before turning green. Technical problems, he muttered to himself, pushing the door with his shoulder. What he found on the other side was not the cold, impersonal elegance he expected from his suite. An amber soft light emanated from strategically positioned lamps, creating a welcoming environment that contrasted dramatically with the minimalist decor he had seen during check-in. The scent of vanilla hung in the air, mixed with something he couldn't immediately identify, perhaps lavender or jasmine. His eyes slowly adjusted to the golden dimness, and that's when he saw. On the king-size bed, 2 small bodies were sleeping deeply, nestled in white sheets like little angels. One of them, no more than 6 years old, clutched a teddy bear against his chest. The other, apparently the same age, had a protective arm over his brother. Michael remained motionless at the entrance, trying to process the scene. His eyes moved slowly around the suite, noticing details that confirmed this was definitely not his room. Toys scattered on the floor, children's books on the coffee table, small clothes carefully folded on an armchair. That's when she appeared. From the bathroom area emerged a female figure wrapped in a white cotton robe. Her brown hair fell in natural waves over her shoulders, still damp from the bath. She walked toward the bed with the silent grace of a mother, accustomed to not waking sleeping children. The recognition was instantaneous and devastating. Sarah. The teacher's name echoed in his mind like a silent scream, carrying an avalanche of memories that he had deeply buried over the years. Her face, more mature now, marked by experience and responsibility, still maintained the same beauty that had hypnotized him a decade ago. She saw him at the same instant. Their eyes met across the golden dimness, and time seemed to freeze. Her expression quickly shifted from surprise to shock, then to what he recognized as a mixture of anger and maternal protection. Sarah swallowed hard, her fingers instinctively contracting in the fabric of her robe. With careful but determined movements, she approached the bed and pulled the sheets over the 2 boys, covering them completely as if wanting to protect them not only from the cold, but from his very presence. "Get out." The word left her lips like a whisper, loaded with years of silence, of unspoken hurt, of nights when she had probably wondered where he was. It wasn't a request, it was a firm, definitive order. Michael couldn't respond immediately. His words seemed to have gotten stuck somewhere between his heart and throat. His eyes moved involuntarily to the children's faces, partially visible above the white sheets. And then he saw the delicate features, the line of the nose, the curve of the eyebrows. But it was the eyes, even closed in sleep, that hit him, like a punch to the stomach. Those green eyes, unmistakable, that he saw every day in the mirror, duplicated, multiplied by 2. The doubt that had begun as a vague suspicion transformed into absolute certainty with the force of a revelation. Those boys, those 2 little beings who slept so peacefully on the bed, carried his features on their faces, his blood in their veins. "My God," he murmured, so low that he could barely hear his own voice. Sarah noticed the direction of his gaze and quickly positioned herself between him and the children, like a lioness protecting her cubs. "I said get out," she repeated, this time more firmly, although she still kept her tone low so as not to wake the boys. Michael took a step toward the bed, moved by an impulse he couldn't control. He wanted to see better, to confirm what his eyes and heart already knew, but Sarah extended her hand, blocking his path. "No," she said, slowly shaking her head. "You don't have the right." The phrase hit him like a sharp blade, but he knew she was right. He had no right at all. Not after everything. Not after disappearing from her life without explanations, leaving only broken promises and a future they had planned together reduced to ashes. He slowly backed away, his hands trembling almost imperceptibly. "Sarah, I didn't know." "Of course you didn't know," she replied, bitterness tinging every word. "You never wanted to know." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael looked one last time at the sleeping boys, engraving in his memory every detail he could distinguish in the dimness. The dark hair of one of them, identical to his in childhood. The way the other clung to the teddy bear exactly as he did at 6 years old. "How old are they?" The question came out before he could stop it. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, as if the simple question caused her physical pain. 6, she finally answered. "They turned 7 in December." The math was all too simple. 6 years ago they were still together, still planning a future, still believing that love was enough to overcome any obstacle, until everything fell apart. "They are," he began, but couldn't finish the sentence. "They're mine," Sarah interrupted, her voice as firm as steel. "Only mine. You gave up that right a long time ago." Michael nodded slowly, knowing she was right, but feeling as if something inside him was shattering. He had lost much more than he imagined when he made that fateful decision 6 years ago. I'll leave," he finally said, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. "But Sarah, we need to talk." "No," she responded immediately. "We don't need anything. You had your chance to talk. You had 6 years to find me, to explain, to be present." The word present hung in the air between them like an accusation. Michael knew there was no possible defense. He had chosen ambition over love, success over family, career over her. And now he discovered that his choice had cost much more than he had ever imagined. He slowly headed toward the door, each step seeming to take him further away, not just from the room, but from a part of himself that he didn't even know existed. At the threshold he stopped and turned one last time. Sarah remained standing beside the bed, a protective silhouette in the golden light. One of the boys moved slightly in his sleep, murmuring something inaudible. She immediately leaned over, gently caressing the child's hair until he calmed down. The scene, so natural, so full of maternal love, made Michael's heart painfully contract. That could have been his too. Should have been. "Sarah," he said softly. She raised her eyes, and for a brief moment he saw beyond the anger and resentment. He saw the woman he had loved, the woman who had carried and raised his children alone, the woman who had been strong when he had been a coward. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words carried the weight of 6 years of regret. She didn't answer. She just watched him leave and softly closed the door behind him. Michael remained in the corridor for several minutes, leaning against the wall, trying to process everything that had happened. His rational mind tried to find logical explanations, but his heart already knew the truth. He was a father to 2 boys who didn't know him, who slept peacefully just a few meters away, protected by a woman he had deeply hurt. The golden card was still in his hand. Finally, he looked at it carefully and realized the error. 274, not 247. A simple mistake in the system, an insignificant technical failure that had completely changed the course of his life. As he walked toward the elevator to find his real suite, Michael knew that nothing would ever be the same. The man who had entered that corridor 20 minutes ago no longer existed. In his place walked a father who had discovered too late what really mattered in life. And in suite 247, Sarah remained awake, watching her children sleep, knowing that the past had finally caught up with them and that the consequences of that unexpected encounter were just beginning. Dawn arrived at the resort with a deceptive softness, tinting the sky with pinkish tones that contrasted with the storm forming in the hearts of its guests. Michael had not managed to sleep even an hour. He had remained on the balcony of his real suite, observing the sea and reliving every second of that devastating encounter. The first lights of day revealed a transformed man. His eyes, normally firm and determined, now carried a vulnerability that he hadn't felt in decades. The discovery of fatherhood had crumbled all the certainties he had built about himself. On the other side of the resort, Sarah also hadn't been able to rest. Sitting in an armchair next to the quay, bed where the twins still slept, she alternated between watching her children and staring at the door through which Michael had left. Part of her expected him to return. Another part hoped he would disappear again, as he had done years ago. Matthew and Mark, her little treasures, remained oblivious to the revolution that their mere existence had caused. They slept with the tranquility typical of childhood, unaware that their lives were about to change forever. It was Matthew who woke, up first as always. At 6 years old, he was the more adventurous of the two, the one who woke up ready to explore the world. His green eyes, so similar to Michael's that Sarah felt her heart tighten, opened slowly. "Good morning, Mummy," he said, stretching like a kitten. "You didn't sleep in the bed." Sarah forced a smile, approaching to caress her son's rebellious hair. "I did, sweetheart. I just woke up a little earlier." Mark woke up soon after, more sleepy than his brother. He was the more observant of the two, the one who noticed details that went unnoticed by others. His equally green eyes scanned the room with curiosity. "Mommy, why do you have that sad face?" he asked, demonstrating that keen perception that always surprised Sarah. "I'm not sad, my love," she lied gently. "How about we have breakfast? I heard there are pancakes today." The mention of pancakes was enough to excite the two boys, who jumped out of bed with the typical energy of children. While they were preparing for breakfast, Sarah took refuge in the bathroom, allowing herself a few minutes of vulnerability in front of the mirror. The reflection that stared back at her was of a strong woman who had raised 2 children alone, built a solid career as an architect, and overcome challenges that seemed insurmountable. But it was also the reflection of a woman who carried old wounds, emotional scars that time had eased, but not completely healed. Meanwhile, on the other side of the resort, Michael was making a decision that would change everything. He could no longer stay still, pretending nothing had happened. He needed to see them again, even if from a distance. He needed to confirm what his eyes and heart already knew. The main restaurant of the resort was a spacious, airy environment with a view of the sea. Tables strategically scattered allowed privacy, while maintaining the feeling of integration with the lush nature around. Michael chose a discreet table from where he could observe the entrance without being easily noticed. He didn't have to wait long. Sarah appeared about 20 minutes later, walking hand in hand with the two boys. She wore a simple summer dress, navy blue, which enhanced her natural beauty. Her hair was tied in a casual bun, and she wore dark glasses that hid her eyes, but not the visible tension in her shoulders. The boys, on the other hand, radiated, the typical joy of vacations. Matthew wore a Spider-Man t-shirt and red shorts, while Mark had opted for a striped shirt and jean shorts. Both carried small backpacks with toys and books. Michael felt the air leave his lungs when he saw them, up close for the first time in natural light. The resemblance was even more impressive than he had imagined. It wasn't just the green eyes. It was the shape of the face, the line of the jaw, the way Matthew tilted his head when he was curious, exactly as he did. They sat a few tables away, and Michael could hear fragments of their conversation. Sarah's voice, affectionate and patient, explaining the menu, the crystalline laughter of the boys when a waiter balanced plates in an acrobatic manner, Matthew's request for enormous pancakes, and Mark's polite correction, preferring normal-sized pancakes, please. That's when it happened. Lucy Thompson, a socialite known in business circles and a frequent guest at the country's most exclusive resorts, was leaving the restaurant when she noticed Michael sitting alone. Known for her sharp tongue and love of gossip, she couldn't resist the opportunity for a conversation. "Michael Reynolds!" she exclaimed, approaching his table without ceremony. "What a surprise to find you here, business or pleasure?" Michael, absorbed in observing the family he had just discovered, took a few seconds to notice Lucy's presence. "Lucy," he greeted, politely forcing a smile. "Pleasure, definitely." "How wonderful. You deserve a vacation, you work too much." Lucy pulled up a chair without being invited, clearly disposed to prolong the conversation. "Are you alone? I thought you might bring a companion." "I prefer tranquility," Michael responded, hoping the answer would discourage more questions. But it was at that moment that Matthew, trying to get a waiter's attention, stood up in his chair and waved energetically. The movement caught Lucy's attention, who looked in the direction of the child. What she saw left her dumbfounded. "Oh my God," she murmured, her eyes moving quickly between Michael and the boys. "Michael, that boy is—" "Is what?" Michael asked, trying to keep his voice casual, although his heart was racing. "He looks just like you," Lucy exclaimed, her voice too loud for the environment. "Look, the same eyes, the same face. It's like seeing you in miniature." Several heads turned in their direction, including Sarah's, who removed her dark glasses and looked directly at Michael's table. Their eyes met across the restaurant, and he saw in them a mixture of panic and fury. "Lucy, you're exaggerating," Michael tried to minimize, but his voice sounded too tense to be convincing. "Exaggerating? Michael, I have eyes, and that woman—" Lucy followed Michael's gaze and noticed Sarah. "She's beautiful. Do you know each other?" Michael's silence was enough of an answer to further sharpen the woman's curiosity. Sarah, realizing that the situation was getting out of control, quickly called her children. "Boys, let's eat in the suite today," she said, trying to sound casual, but Michael noticed the tremor in her voice. "But Mummy, the pancakes haven't arrived yet," Matthew protested. "We'll order to the room, honey. It'll be more fun." Lucy observed the whole scene with the eyes of a detective. Sarah quickly gathering their belongings, the boys protesting, the nervousness evident in her haste, and Michael sitting there, clearly connected somehow to that situation. "Michael," Lucy said slowly, her voice loaded with insinuation, "do you have children?" The question echoed in the air like a gunshot. Michael felt all words flee from his mind. He couldn't lie, not after what he had discovered. But he also couldn't confirm something he was still trying to process. "Lucy, I prefer not to discuss personal life," he finally said. But the evasive denial only confirmed the woman's suspicions. "My God, they are your children. You have a secret." "Family." The exclamation was loud enough to be heard by several people in the restaurant. Sarah, who was passing their table with the boys, clearly heard the words. Her steps faltered for a moment, and Michael saw the blush of embarrassment rise up her neck. Matthew, always curious, looked at Michael and then at his mother. "Mommy, why is that lady talking about us?" "She's not talking about us, honey," Sarah responded quickly, but her voice sounded forced. "Come on, we have to go." But the damage was already done. Lucy had planted the seed of speculation, and in an environment like that resort, where the American elite concentrated, gossip traveled faster than the wind. As Sarah and the boys left the restaurant, Michael could see other guests whispering among themselves, looking alternately at him and at the family that had just left. Some discreetly took photos with their cell phones. "Lucy," Michael said, his voice loaded with an authority that made the woman stop talking immediately, "I would greatly appreciate it if you kept your speculations to yourself." But he knew it was already too late. Lucy Thompson was known for being unable to keep secrets, especially when they involved public figures like him. Before lunch, half the resort would know of her discovery. Michael finished his coffee quickly and left the restaurant, ignoring the curious glances that followed him. He needed to talk to Sarah, to explain that he hadn't planned any of this, that the last thing he wanted was to expose her and the boys to public speculation. But when he reached the corridor of her suite, he found only silence. He knocked softly, on the door, then with more insistence. No response. On the other side of the door, Sarah was sitting on the bathroom floor, holding the phone with trembling hands. There were 3 missed calls from her sister, 2 from her best friend, and a text message from an unknown number with a photo of her and the boys leaving the restaurant. The photo had been taken from a distance, but it was clear enough to show her nervousness and the striking resemblance between the boys and the man who had remained seated in the restaurant. The caption read, "Famous businessman's secret family revealed at luxury resort." Matthew and Mark played in the room, oblivious to the chaos that was forming around them. For them, this was still just another day of vacation. They didn't know that their photos were already circulating in WhatsApp groups, that speculations about their paternity were being debated on social media, that their private life was about to become public entertainment. Sarah closed her eyes and rested her head against the cold bathroom wall. She had spent 6 years protecting her children from exactly that, from exposure, from speculation, from the pain of having a father who had abandoned them before they were even born. And now, in a single morning, everything had crumbled. Outside, the door. Michael remained motionless, knowing she was there, knowing they needed to talk, but respecting the silence she had chosen. He had caused this. His mere presence had destroyed the peace she had so carefully built. As the sun rose in the tropical sky, the waves continued to break on the beach, indifferent to the human drama unfolding at the resort. But for Michael, Sarah, and their children, this was just the beginning of a storm that would test all the limits of love, forgiveness, and redemption. The secret had come out of the box, and there was no way to put it back. The afternoon at the resort progressed with a superficial tranquility that contrasted dramatically with the tension that hung in the air. Michael had spent the last 3 hours walking on the beach, trying to organize his thoughts and decide what his next step would be. The cell phone in his pocket vibrated incessantly, calls from advisors, journalists, and even his personal lawyer, who had been alerted about the speculations that were beginning to circulate on social networks. The news had spread like wildfire. Michael Reynolds and the secret family were already among the most commented topics on Twitter, and gossip blogs had begun to speculate about the identity of the mysterious woman and the children who seemed to carry the businessman's traits. Sarah, for her part, had locked the door of the suite and turned off the room phone after the 10th call from unknown numbers. Sitting on the sofa, she watched Matthew and Mark assemble a puzzle on the floor, their childish minds completely oblivious to the storm that was forming around them. "Mommy, are you okay?" asked Mark, raising his green eyes from the puzzle. He had always been the more perceptive of the two, capable of detecting subtle changes in his mother's mood. "Yes, I am, my love," Sarah responded, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm just a little tired." Matthew, who had inherited not only Michael's eyes but also his stubborn determination, wasn't satisfied with the answer. "You've been strange since last night. Did something happen?" The innocent question hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. How to explain to 2 6-year-old children that the father they had never known had suddenly appeared in their lives? How to tell them that their peaceful existence was being threatened by forces beyond their control? "Sometimes adults worry about boring things," she responded diplomatically. "Nothing you need to worry about." But even as she pronounced these words, Sarah knew it was a lie. The boys would have to worry because their lives were about to change drastically, whether they wanted it or not. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Sarah felt her heart quicken, expecting to hear Michael's voice on the other side, but it was a female voice that echoed through the corridor. "Sarah, it's me, Carla, from reception. I need to talk to you." Sarah had known Carla since her arrival at the resort 3 days ago. She was an experienced employee, always smiling and helpful. But there was something different in her voice now, an urgency that wasn't present before. After checking that the boys were entertained with the puzzle, Sarah opened the door just a crack. "Hi, Carla. Is there a problem?" Carla looked nervously, out of the sides before responding. "Sarah, I need to warn you about something. There are journalists arriving at the resort. They're asking about you and the boys." Sarah's blood froze in her veins. "Journalists?" "Yes, apparently someone leaked the story about you and Mr. Reynolds. They want a statement, photos. You know how it is." Sarah leaned on the doorframe, feeling her legs go weak. "How much time do I have?" "Not much. Security is trying to keep them at the main entrance, but you know they always find a way in. I suggest you leave through the staff entrance if you want to avoid the confrontation." "Thank you, Carla. I'll think about what to do." After closing the door, Sarah leaned against it and closed her eyes. 6 years of peace, 6 years building a stable life for her children, and everything was crumbling in a matter of hours. "Mommy?" Matthew's voice brought her back to reality. "Why are you crying?" Sarah brought her hand to her face and realized that silent tears were running down her cheeks. "I'm not crying, love, it's allergies." But Matthew wasn't fooled. With the seriousness of a child who had matured too early, he stood up and walked to her, wrapping her in a tight hug. "Everything will be okay, Mommy. You always say everything turns out okay in the end." The innocence and unconditional love of her son almost made Sarah collapse completely. She hugged him back, breathing in the familiar smell of children's shampoo and sunscreen. Meanwhile, on the other side of the resort, Michael was facing his own storm. He had locked himself in his suite after being approached by 3 different journalists during his walk on the beach. His cell phone rang incessantly, and emails accumulated in his inbox. His press officer, Danielle Carter, had managed to reach the resort in record time and was now sitting in front of him with a grave expression. "Michael, the situation is getting out of control," she said, consulting her tablet. "We have to give an official response, or this is going to snowball even more." "What kind of response?" Michael asked, massaging his temples where a pulsating headache was forming. "Well, first we need to establish the facts. Are those children really your sons?" The question, posed so directly and professionally, seemed strange to Michael's ears. How to reduce the most impactful discovery of his life to a simple fact to be confirmed or denied. "I believe so," he responded after a long pause. "You believe or you're sure? Because I need to know to formulate the communication strategy." Michael stood up and walked to the window, observing the sea that stretched to the horizon. "Danielle, I looked at those boys and saw myself. I don't need a DNA test to know they're my children." "Okay, let's work with that premise. Now, what's your current relationship with their mother?" "We have no relationship at all. I didn't even know they existed until last night." Danielle made some notes on her tablet. "This complicates things. The press will want to know why you weren't present in their lives, why she didn't tell you about the pregnancy." "Because I was an idiot," Michael interrupted, turning to face her. "Because I chose my career over love. Because when she needed me most, I simply disappeared." The brutal honesty of the response momentarily left Danielle without words. In 15 years working with public relations, she had dealt with all kinds of scandals, but rarely did she see a client assume guilt so directly. "Michael, I understand that you feel guilty, but we can't build a communication strategy based on self-recrimination. We need a narrative that protects both you and your family." "My family," Michael repeated slowly, tasting the words. "You're right. They are my family, even if I haven't been present." "Exactly. So let's focus on that. You recently discovered you're a father and want to be present in the children's lives from now on. It's a story of redemption of a man who wants to correct the mistakes of the past." But even as Danielle spoke, Michael knew that reality was much more complicated than any communication strategy could solve. Sarah had made it clear that she didn't want his presence in the boys' lives. She had built a family without him, and now he was an intruder, threatening the stability she had created. An urgent knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Danielle opened it and found a clearly agitated resort employee. "Mr. Reynolds, sorry to bother you, but there's a situation downstairs. Some journalists managed to get in and are trying to approach the lady and the children at the pool." Michael's blood froze. "What?" Security is trying to control the situation, but the children got scared with the cameras and Michael didn't wait to hear the rest. He rushed out of the suite, ignoring Danielle's calls behind him. He descended the stairs 2 steps at a time, his heart beating erratically not from physical exertion, but from pure panic. He arrived at the pool area and found a scene that filled him with fury. Sarah was standing near the lounge chairs, trying to protect Matthew and Mark, who were hiding behind her. 3 journalists with cameras surrounded them, asking questions loudly. "Ma'am, what's your relationship with Michael Reynolds? Are the children his sons? Why have you kept the relationship a secret?" Sarah was trying to maintain her composure, but Michael could see the fear in her eyes. Matthew was crying silently, clinging to his mother's leg, while Mark tried to hide his face with his small hands. The sight of his children, terrorized by invasive photographers, awakened in Michael a protective fury that he didn't even know he possessed. "Stop!" he shouted, advancing toward the group. "Move away from them now!" The journalists turned in surprise, but quickly redirected their cameras toward him. "Mr. Reynolds, can you confirm if these are your children?" "I said move away," Michael repeated, positioning himself between the reporters and his family. "You're scaring children." "We just want a statement, sir." "You won't get any statement while you're terrorizing my children," Michael said, and the words came out before he could think about them. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stared at him with wide eyes, not believing that he had publicly confirmed the paternity. The journalists realized they had just gotten the headline of the day. "So you confirm they are your children?" one of the reporters insisted, taking advantage of the moment. Michael looked at Sarah, seeing in her a mixture of shock and betrayal. Then he looked at Matthew and Mark, who observed him with curiosity and fear. "I confirm," he finally said, his voice clear and firm. "And now I would like you to respect my family's privacy and leave." The public confession had been made. There was no turning back. And as the resort security finally managed to escort the journalists out of the pool area, Michael knew he had just forever changed not only his own life, but the lives of 3 people he loved more than he thought possible. The cat was out of the bag, and now they would have to deal with the consequences. The silence after the journalists' removal was more deafening than any scream. Sarah remained motionless, her eyes fixed on Michael with an intensity he had never seen before. Matthew and Mark continued to cling to her legs, but now they also looked at the man who had just publicly declared himself their father. "Mommy," whispered Matthew, his voice still trembling from the scare. "Did that man say he's our daddy?" The innocent question cut through the air like a blade. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply before kneeling to her children's height. "Boys, let's go to the room." "Now," she said, her voice controlled but tense. "But, Mommy," Mark began, his natural curiosity fighting against obedience. "Now, Mark," Sarah repeated, and there was something in her tone that made both boys obey immediately. Michael took a step forward. "Sarah, we need to talk." She rose slowly, and when she finally faced him, he saw tears of anger shining in her eyes. "Talk? You just publicly declared that you're their father without even consulting me. Which part of that suggests a conversation?" "I couldn't stand by and watch them being harassed by reporters," Michael defended himself, but even he knew his justification sounded weak. "They weren't being harassed by reporters by chance, Michael," Sarah retorted, her voice loaded with years of pent-up hurt. "They were being harassed because you appeared in our lives and caused all this confusion." Matthew and Mark observed the discussion with wide eyes, trying to understand the tension between the adults. They had never seen their mother so upset, nor witnessed a discussion of that intensity. Sarah noticed her children's gaze and quickly composed herself. "Boys, go ahead to the room. I'll be right there." "You'll come soon, Mummy?" asked Matthew, reluctant to leave her alone. "Yes, honey. I'm just going to talk briefly with this gentleman here." The children moved away slowly, looking back several times. Sarah waited until they were out of earshot before turning to Michael again. "How dare you?" she said, her voice low, but loaded with fury. How dare you appear after 6 years and unilaterally decide that you're part of our lives? Sarah, I know I made mistakes. Mistakes? She interrupted him, taking a step forward. Michael, you didn't make mistakes. You made choices, deliberate and conscious choices. When I told you I was pregnant, you chose your company. When I begged you to stay, you chose a merger in London. When I needed you to share the fear, the responsibility, the love, you chose not to be here. Each word was like a direct hit, and Michael felt the weight of his past decisions falling on him like an avalanche. You're right. I was a coward, selfish. But Sarah, when I found out about their existence— When you found out, she repeated, her voice rising an octave. Michael, you always knew. I told you about the pregnancy. You chose not to want to know anything else. The accusation hit him like lightning. Sarah, you never told me they were twins. You never told me they had been born. Because you made it very clear that you didn't want to be part of it. The tears she had contained finally began to flow. Do you remember the last thing you said to me before boarding for London? Sarah, you're young. You'll find someone better to be the father of your children. Of your children, Michael. As if they weren't yours too. The memory of that night returned with full force, and Michael felt his stomach turn. He remembered perfectly those cruel words, said in the heat of the argument, when she had tried one last time to convince him to stay. I didn't mean that, he murmured. But you said it, and I believed it. I spent the entire pregnancy believing that you really didn't want them. I spent 9 months preparing to be a single mother because the man I loved had made it clear he didn't want responsibilities. Michael felt his legs go weak. He sat heavily in one of the pool chairs, burying his face in his hands. My God, Sarah, what did I do? You made a choice, she replied, wiping away tears with the back of her hand. And I made mine. I chose to protect my children from a father who didn't want them. I chose to create a stable life where they wouldn't feel rejected or abandoned. And do they feel that? Do they ask about their father? Sarah hesitated before answering. They used to when they were younger, especially Matthew. He was always more persistent. I would tell them that their daddy had traveled very far away and that maybe one day he would return. And Mark? Mark stopped asking when he turned 4. He's more observant, more sensitive. I think he noticed that the subject made me sad. The silence that followed was loaded with weight and regret. Michael raised his eyes and saw Sarah observing the pool, where moments before her children had been playing peacefully, oblivious to the complications of the adult world. Sarah, he said softly, I know I don't have the right to ask for anything. I know I don't deserve a second chance, but now that I know they exist, I can't simply pretend they're not my children. And what exactly do you want, Michael? Do you want to play daddy for a few weeks until you get tired of the novelty? Do you want to appear sporadically in their lives when your schedule allows? No, he responded immediately. I want to be present. Really, I want to know them. I want them to know me. I want to make up for these 6 years I lost. Sarah gave a bitter laugh. Make up? Michael, you don't make up for 6 years of absence with a few weekend visits. You don't make up for the nights when Matthew had a fever and I stayed up alone. You don't make up for the times Mark asked why all his little friends had a daddy and he didn't. Each word was a stab in Michael's heart. Then let me try. Let me be present from now on. And if you change your mind? If you decide the responsibility is too heavy? If an irrefusable business opportunity appears on the other side of the world? That won't happen. How can you be sure? Michael, you're exactly the same person you were 6 years ago. Rich, powerful, accustomed to getting everything you want, and now you want the perfect family to complete your public image. The accusation was harsh, but Michael knew she had reasons to be suspicious. It's not about public image, Sarah. It's about the fact that for the first time in my life I understand what really matters. And what is that? Them. You all. This family that I was too idiotic to value when I had the chance. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, studying his face as if looking for signs of sincerity or manipulation. Michael, you have no idea what it means to be a father. It's not just joy and cute moments. It's constant responsibility. It's putting their needs before yours. It's being present in the difficult moments, not just the fun ones. Then teach me, he said, surprising himself with the vulnerability of the response. Teach me to be the father they deserve. Sarah was silent for so long that Michael began to think she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, but still cautious. Michael, even if I wanted to give that chance, and I'm not saying I do, you just publicly declared that you're their father. Our private life has become a circus. How do you think we're going to deal with that? The reality of the situation fell on them like a bucket of cold water. Michael had acted on impulse, moved by protective instinct, but hadn't thought about the long-term consequences of his public confession. We'll figure out a way, he said, but even he knew it sounded more like hope than certainty. Sarah slowly shook her head. No, Michael, we won't figure out anything. You created this mess. You deal with solving it. I'm leaving. Sarah, wait. No, Michael. I spent 6 years building a peaceful life for my children. I won't let you destroy that. In a few days. She turned to leave, but Michael reached her, gently touching her arm. Please don't run away from me again. Sarah turned, and he saw that the tears had returned to her eyes. I didn't run away from you, Michael. You left my life, and now you're asking me to risk my children's well-being based on the promise of a man who has already abandoned me once. Sarah? No, she interrupted him, moving away from his touch. You want to prove you've changed? Then prove it, but away from us. Solve this mess you created. Deal with the press, with the speculations, with the whole circus our life has become. And when all this is over, if you still want to be a father, maybe, we can talk. With those words, Sarah moved away toward the hotel building, leaving Michael alone in the pool area, surrounded by the wreckage of a confession that had changed everything, but resolved nothing. As she walked through the corridors toward the suite, Sarah knew there was one more bomb about to explode. Inside the room, Matthew and Mark were waiting for her with a question she didn't know how to answer. Mommy, is that man really our daddy? And for the first time in 6 years, Sarah didn't have a ready answer for her children. Sarah stopped in front of the suite door, her hand trembling slightly on the doorknob. From the other side, she could hear the low voices of Matthew and Mark, probably trying to process everything that had happened. She took 3 deep breaths, as she always did when she needed to calm down, and opened the door. The boys were sitting on the bed, side by side, with a closeness that only twins can have. Matthew, always the most direct, was the first to speak. Mommy, were you crying? Sarah instinctively touched her face, checking if there were traces of tears. No, honey, it's just the heat. Mark, with his keen perception, studied her carefully. Mommy, that man said he's our daddy. Is it true? The question she feared had arrived. Sarah sat in the armchair in front of the bed, in the same position where she had spent the previous night without sleeping. It's complicated, my loves, she began, carefully choosing her words. But is it yes or no? Insisted Matthew with the relentless logic of children. Is he or isn't he? Sarah looked at her 2 sons, their green eyes so similar to Michael's, their expressions too serious for 6-year-old children. They deserved honesty, within the limits that a child can understand. Yes, she finally said. He is your daddy. The silence that followed was filled only by the sound of the air conditioner and the distant sea. Matthew and Mark exchanged a significant look, one of those silent conversations that twins have. Why did he never come to visit us? Asked Mark, his voice small and vulnerable. Sarah felt her heart shatter. This was the question she most feared, because the honest answer would hurt much more than any merciful lie. Because sometimes adults make big mistakes, she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. And sometimes those mistakes make people move away from each other. But we didn't do anything wrong, said Matthew, with devastating logic. No, my love, you didn't do anything wrong, never. This was a problem between Daddy and Mommy. It has nothing to do with you. Mark approached her, climbing into her lap as he did when he was smaller. Mommy, are you sad because he showed up? The question was so direct and honest that Sarah couldn't formulate a diplomatic response. "A little," she admitted. "Mommy is confused about many things, but you always said that one day he might come back," Matthew reminded, joining his brother in his mother's lap, even though they were both already too big for that. "Yes, I did," Sarah confirmed, hugging them, both against her chest. "But I didn't expect it to be like this." "How did you expect it to be?" asked Mark. Sarah thought about the question. During all these years, in the rare times when she allowed herself to imagine a reunion with Michael, she had fantasized about scenarios where he appeared repentant, mature, ready to assume responsibilities. But she had never imagined the chaos, the public exposure, the feeling of having her private life invaded. "I expected it to be more peaceful," she replied. "Is he going to live with us now?" asked Matthew, always practical. "No, honey. He has his life and we have ours." "But can he visit us?" Sarah hesitated. This was exactly the decision she was avoiding making. "I don't know yet, Matthew. I need to think about many things." "Can I ask a question?" said Mark, his voice even lower than normal. "Of course, my love. Why did he leave when we were born?" The question cut Sarah like a blade. How to explain to a child that his father had chosen ambition over love? How to explain that not every story has a happy ending? "He didn't leave when you were born," she gently corrected. "He left before, when you were still in Mommy's tummy." "Why?" Because he got scared. Sometimes adults get scared of big responsibilities like taking care of babies." Matthew frowned. "But babies are easy to take care of. They just eat, sleep, and poop." Despite the tension of the moment, Sarah couldn't contain a smile. "It's not quite like that, honey. Babies are a lot of work and need a lot of love and dedication." "And he didn't have love to give?" asked Mark with a sadness that broke Sarah's heart. "I think he didn't know he had it," she replied, surprising herself with her own answer. Perhaps Michael really didn't know at the time what he was capable of in terms of love and dedication. "And now he knows," insisted Matthew. "I don't know, my love. That's what Mommy needs to find out." The boys were quiet for a few minutes, processing the information. Sarah could almost hear their brains working, trying to fit the pieces of this complex emotional puzzle. "Mommy," said Mark finally, "can I talk to him?" The question took Sarah completely by surprise. "Talk to him?" "Yes, I want to ask him questions." "What kind of questions?" Mark thought for a moment. "I want to ask why he left, and if he likes us, and if he knows how to play chess." Matthew got excited with his brother's idea. "I want to ask things too. I want to know if he has video games and if he can teach me to drive." Sarah felt panic rise up her throat. The children's natural curiosity was leading them exactly where she didn't want them to go. "Boys, you need to understand that the situation is complicated. It's not as simple as you think." "Why not?" asked Matthew. "He's our daddy. We want to get to know him." "What's the problem?" The childish logic was relentless and, in a way, irrefutable. Sarah found herself in an impossible situation: deny her children the right to know their father, or expose them to a person who had already deeply hurt their family. "The problem is that your daddy is a very important person, with a very complicated life, and now that everyone knows you exist, our life has also become complicated." As if to illustrate her point, the room phone rang again. Sarah looked at the caller ID and saw an unknown number, probably another journalist. "See?" she said, pointing to the phone. "Since last night, strange people haven't stopped calling wanting to know about us." "But why?" asked Mark, genuinely confused. "Because your daddy is famous. He has a very big company and appears on TV sometimes. People get curious about his life." "Cool," exclaimed Matthew. "Our daddy is famous." The enthusiastic reaction of her son made Sarah realize that the boys didn't understand the negative implications of fame. For them, having a famous father sounded exciting, not invasive. "Matthew, it's not cool when strange people take pictures of you without permission or ask questions about our family," she explained patiently. "But that will stop, right, Mummy?" asked Mark. "Eventually, yes," Sarah replied, though she wasn't sure of that. Another contemplative silence followed. Sarah could see that the boys were trying to fit all this new information into their worldview, which until yesterday was simple and safe. "Mommy," said Matthew suddenly, "don't you like him anymore?" The question caught her completely off guard. "Why are you asking that?" "Because you were fighting and you seemed very angry with him." Sarah sighed. Children were much more observant than she would like. "It's not that I don't like him, Matthew. It's that it's hard for Mommy to see him after so long. It brings back many sad memories." "But also good memories?" asked Mark, always trying to find the positive side of situations. Sarah thought about the question. Were there good memories? Of course there were. Before everything fell apart, she and Michael had had beautiful moments together. They had planned a future, dreamed of children, built a love story that seemed solid. "Yes," she admitted. "There are good memories too." "Then why can't you be friends again?" asked Matthew with the devastating simplicity of children. "Because sometimes when someone hurts us a lot, it becomes difficult to trust that person again," Sarah explained. "But you always say everyone deserves a second chance," Mark reminded. Touché. Sarah had raised her children with values of forgiveness and compassion, and now they were using her own lessons against her. "You're right," she finally said. "Everyone deserves a second chance, but sometimes we need time to be ready to give that chance." "How much time?" asked Matthew. "I don't know, honey. Each person needs a different amount of time." A soft knock on the door interrupted the conversation. Sarah tensioned immediately, but was relieved to hear Carla's voice from reception. "Sarah, it's me again. I have important information." Sarah opened the door, keeping the boys behind her. "Hi, Carla, what happened now?" "Mr. Reynolds asked me to deliver this to you," Carla said, extending a white envelope. "He said it's important, and that you'll understand when you read it." Sarah took the envelope with hesitant hands. "Did he say anything else?" "He said he'll be waiting at the resort's private beach, the one at the end of the trail." "Know it?" Sarah nodded. It was a small isolated beach, accessible only by a 15-minute walk through the woods. She and the boys had discovered the place on the first day and returned several times because of the privacy. "Thank you, Carla." After closing the door, Sarah stood looking at the envelope for a long moment. Matthew and Mark approached, curious. "What is it, Mummy?" asked Mark. "A letter from your daddy." "Are you going to read it?" asked Matthew. Sarah looked at her children, saw the curiosity and hope in their green eyes, and knew the time had come to make a decision. She could no longer postpone the inevitable. "Yes," she finally said. "I'll read it." And as she opened the envelope with trembling fingers, Sarah knew that whatever was written there could change everything once again. Sarah unfolded the letter, carefully, as if the paper might disintegrate between her fingers. Michael's handwriting was exactly as she remembered, firm, decisive, but with an elegance that had always impressed her. Matthew and Mark positioned themselves on either side of her, trying to read over her shoulder. "Sarah," the letter began, and even seeing just her name written by him, she felt a tightness in her chest. "I know I don't have the right to ask for your attention after everything that happened, but I need you to know a few things, not as an excuse for what I did, but as an explanation for what I intend to do from now on. When you told me about the pregnancy 6 years ago, I panicked. Not a common panic, but a deep and irrational terror of not being able to be the father that a child would deserve. My own father was absent, cold, more interested in business than family. I grew up promising never to be like him, but when I found myself facing the possibility of fatherhood, all I could think was that I would become exactly what I always hated in him. So I ran. I accepted that opportunity in London because it seemed easier to start from scratch than to face my own fears. I thought I was protecting you and the child from an inadequate father. I realized too late that I was just being a coward. In these 6 years, I tried to convince myself that I had made the right choice. I built a business empire, accumulated wealth and recognition, but never managed to fill the void I left when I walked out of your life. Every night for 6 years, I wondered what our child would be like, if they would have your eyes or mine, if they would be quiet like you or restless like I was in childhood. Discovering that there are two, Sarah. Discovering that all this time there have been two little people who carry half of me and whom I've never met, that destroyed me in a way I didn't even know was possible. I looked at Matthew and Mark last night and saw not just my eyes, but my stubbornness in the way Matthew insisted on not letting go of the teddy bear even while sleeping. I saw your sensitivity in the way Mark protected his brother during sleep. I saw in them everything that could have been if I hadn't been an idiot. I know I can't go back in time. I know I can't erase 6 years of absence with some nice words in a letter. But I need you to know that the discovery of their existence changed something fundamental in me. For the first time in my life, I completely understand what it means to love someone more than life itself. You said I don't know what it means to be a father, and you're right. But I want to learn, not sporadically, or conveniently, but really, I want to be present for all the little things that make fatherhood special. I want to teach Matthew to ride a bicycle and listen to Mark read his first words. I want to be the man who protects them from nightmares and encourages them to pursue their dreams. But mainly, Sarah, I want to deserve the forgiveness that you may never be able to give me. I know I created a mess with the press today. I know our private life became a circus because of my impulsive reaction. But when I saw those reporters scaring our children, something primitive and protective awakened in me. For the first time, I acted as a father before thinking as a businessman. I'll resolve the situation with the media. I'll give an official interview, take full responsibility for the past, and make it clear that any harassment of you and the children will be dealt with legally. I'll protect you in the best way I can. But after that, Sarah, I beg you to give me a chance, not a chance to be your boyfriend or husband again. I know I lost that right a long time ago. A chance to be a father. A chance to get to know Matthew and Mark. A chance to show that I've changed, that I've grown, that I finally understand what really matters in life. If you say no, I'll respect your decision and disappear from your lives. But if there's a small possibility, a crack of hope that I can be part of their lives, I'll be waiting at the beach at the end of the trail. No matter your decision, Sarah, I want you to know that these have been the most important days of my life. Meeting my children, even for such a short time, gave me a purpose that I didn't even know I was looking for. With eternal love and regret, Michael P.S. I included 2 smaller letters along with this one. They're for Matthew and Mark, in case you decide they can read them someday. I wrote what I would have liked to have told them from day one. Sarah finished reading with tears silently running down her face. The brutal honesty of the letter had penetrated all her carefully constructed defenses. Beside her, Matthew and Mark remained quiet, perceiving the emotional intensity of the moment, even without completely understanding it. "Mommy, you're crying." "Again," observed Mark, gently touching her face. "They're different tears, my love," Sarah said, wiping her eyes. "Different how?" asked Matthew. "Sometimes we cry because we're sad, sometimes because we're happy, and sometimes because we're confused." "And you're confused now?" "Very confused," Sarah admitted. She noticed that there were indeed 2 smaller envelopes along with the main letter. She hesitated for a moment before handing them to the boys. "These are for you," she said. "They're letters from your daddy." The boys' eyes lit up with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Matthew took one envelope and Mark the other, but both looked at Sarah before opening them. "Can I read it?" asked Matthew. Sarah nodded, although her heart was racing with the possibility of Michael having written something inappropriate for 6-year-old children. Matthew tore open the envelope with the impatience typical of his age and unfolded a sheet of paper. His reading was still slow, so he murmured the words in a low voice. "To Matthew, my brave son." Mark, more cautious, opened his envelope carefully and began to read silently, his lips moving slightly with each word. Sarah watched her children read their first words from their father, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Part of her was furious that Michael assumed he had the right to address the children directly. Another part was curious about what he had written, and a small part, which she tried to ignore, was touched by his attempt to connect with his children. "Mommy," said Matthew, raising his eyes from the letter. "He says he's sorry for not being here when we were born. And that he wants to teach me chess," added Mark, seeming impressed. "How did he know I want to learn chess?" Sarah was surprised. She had mentioned Mark's interest in the game only once to a friend months ago. How could Michael know? "What else did he write?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "He says he has a lot to learn about being a daddy," Matthew read slowly, "and that he wants to know our favorite toys and our dreams. And that he'll never leave again if we want him to stay," Mark added, his voice loaded with a hope that broke Sarah's heart. The boys finished reading and were silent for a few minutes, processing the words. Sarah could see their minds working, trying to fit these written promises with the reality of having an unknown father. "Mommy," said Matthew finally, "can I get to know him better?" The question Sarah most feared had arrived again, but this time with a different weight. It was no longer just childish curiosity. It was a genuine request based on Michael's own words. "I want to too," said Mark quietly. "He seems nice." Sarah looked at her two sons, saw the hope in their green eyes, and felt the weight of a decision that would affect not only their lives, but the future of the family they might or might not become. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Remember what Mommy said about his life being complicated." "But Mommy," said Matthew with his relentless logic, "our life got complicated too. And he said he'll protect us. And he wrote letters to us," added Mark. "That means he really wants to know us, doesn't it?" Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of 6 years of difficult decisions culminating in this moment. When she opened them again, she saw two boys looking at her with a maturity that went beyond their 6 years. "Okay," she finally said, surprising herself with her own decision. "We'll get to know him better, but slowly, one step at a time. And if at any moment you don't feel comfortable, we stop, okay?" The smiles that illuminated Matthew and Mark's faces were like sun rays breaking through dark clouds. For the first time since the reunion with Michael, Sarah saw pure joy in her children. "So we're going to the beach?" asked Matthew, already getting up from the bed. Sarah looked out the window and saw that the sun was beginning to lean toward the west, tinting the sky with golden tones. It was a perfect late afternoon for a walk and perhaps for new beginnings. "Let's go," she said, again surprising herself with her own courage. "But remember, we'll go slowly." As the boys ran to get their sneakers and Sarah collected the letters, she knew she was about to embark on unknown territory. She didn't know if Michael had really changed, if his promises were sincere, or if this would be just another disappointment. But looking at the happiness of Matthew and Mark, Sarah decided that some risks were worth taking, especially when it came to giving her children the chance to know their father. The trail leading to the resort's private beach wound through a preserved forest, where the sound of birds mingled with the distant murmur of waves. Sarah walked slowly, Matthew running ahead, exploring every rock, and Mark at her side, asking questions about the plants they encountered along the way. "Mommy, why are you nervous?" asked Mark, demonstrating once again his ability to read her emotions. Sarah breathed deeply, trying to relax her tense shoulders. "Because it's difficult for Mommy, my love. It's been a long time since I talked to your daddy." "But you were boyfriend and girlfriend before, right?" asked Matthew, who had come back to walk with them. "So you know each other?" "New," Sarah gently corrected. "People change over time. Maybe he's different now." "Different how?" Mark wanted to know. "I don't know yet. That's what we're going to find out." When they finally emerged from the trail and spotted the small beach, Sarah felt her heart quicken. Michael was there, sitting on a rock near the water, looking at the horizon. He had exchanged his formal suit for more casual clothes, beige linen pants and a light blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His bare feet and hair slightly tousled by the sea breeze made him look younger, more like the man she had fallen in love with years ago. Hearing their footsteps on the sand, Michael turned. His eyes immediately met Sarah's, but quickly shifted to Matthew and Mark, who had stopped near their mother, suddenly shy. "Hi," said Michael, rising slowly, as if sudden movements might frighten them. "Hi," Sarah responded, her voice sounding firmer than she expected. Matthew, who could never stay quiet for long, was the first to break the silence. "Are you really our daddy?" The direct question made Michael smile, a genuine, slightly nervous smile. "Yes, I am. And you're Matthew and Mark, right?" "I'm Matthew," said the boy, taking a step forward. "And this is Mark. He's quieter than me." "Nice to meet you," Michael said, kneeling in the sand to be at the boy's height. "I'm Michael. But you? You can call me whatever you want." Mark, who had remained behind Sarah, slowly approached. "Can I ask a question?" "Of course, you can ask as many questions as you want." "Why did you leave?" The question hit Michael like a punch, but he didn't look away. Sarah held her breath, curious to see how he would handle the brutal honesty of children. "Because I was afraid," Michael answered, surprising Sarah with the simplicity of the response. "When I found out you were going to be born, I was very afraid of not knowing how to be a good daddy." "But everyone learns to be a daddy when the baby is born," said Matthew, as if it were obvious. "My friend Luke's daddy said nobody is born knowing." Michael laughed softly. "Your friend Luke has a very intelligent daddy. He's right, but I wasn't mature enough to understand that at the time." "And now you understand?" asked Mark. "Now I understand that the only thing that matters is love, and I love you too from the moment I knew you existed." Sarah felt her eyes water. The simplicity with which Michael conversed with the boys, without condescension but adapting to their level, showed a side of him that she had never seen before. "Do you know how to play soccer?" asked Matthew, changing the subject with the typical speed of children. "I know a little. Do you like soccer?" "I love it," exclaimed Matthew. "Mark prefers reading, but sometimes he plays with me." "And chess?" Michael asked, looking at Mark. "Do you really want to learn?" Mark's eyes lit up. "You know how to play chess?" "Yes, my grandfather taught me when I was your age. I can teach you too if you want." "Now?" Mark asked, excited. Michael looked at Sarah, seeking approval. She nodded slightly. "I didn't bring a board," Michael admitted, "but I can draw on the sand and explain how the pieces move." And that's how Sarah found herself sitting on the sand, watching Michael draw an improvised chessboard while patiently explaining the rules to Mark, who absorbed every word with fascination. Matthew, initially uninterested, soon joined the group, asking questions about why the king was the most important piece if the queen was the most powerful. "That's a good question," Michael said, laughing. "I think it shows that sometimes we protect the people we love not because they're weak, but because they're precious to us." The answer made Sarah look at him with surprise. The Michael she had known years ago was not given to philosophical reflections, especially not with children. "Can I ask another question?" said Matthew, who had gotten tired of chess and was now collecting shells in the sand. "Sure," Michael replied. "Do you have a big house?" "I do," Michael admitted. "Very big, but it's very empty and quiet." "Why empty?" asked Mark. "Because I live alone. I don't have family living with me." Matthew stopped collecting shells and looked at him with curiosity. "You don't have a wife?" "No, I don't." "Why not?" Michael looked briefly at Sarah before answering. "Because I never found someone as special as your mommy." The answer made Sarah blush, and she quickly looked away toward the sea. "Do you still like our mommy?" asked Mark with the devastating frankness of children. "Mark!" Sarah exclaimed, mortified. "It's okay," Michael said softly. He looked directly at Sarah as he answered, "I've always liked your mommy. Even when I was far away, I never stopped liking her." The silence that followed was loaded with tension. Sarah felt her face burn and she stood up abruptly. "I think it's getting late," she said, trying to sound casual. "Boys, let's go back to the hotel." "But Mommy, we just got here," Matthew protested. "And I haven't finished learning chess," Mark added. Michael stood up too, brushing the sand from his hands. "Your mother is right. You must be hungry." "We are," admitted Matthew, "but can you come have dinner with us?" The question caught both Sarah and Michael by surprise. The boys looked expectantly at their mother, clearly hoping she would agree. "I don't know if that's a good idea," Sarah began. "Please, Mommy," begged Mark. "He can tell me more about chess." "And about his house," Matthew added. "I want to know if it has a pool." Sarah looked at Michael, who remained quiet, clearly leaving the decision to her. There was something in his expression, a contained hope, a vulnerability that she had rarely seen in him before. "Okay," she finally yielded, "but dinner in the room. I don't want any more encounters with journalists." The smile that illuminated Michael's face was like the sun rising. "Thank you, Sarah. I promise it will be calm." As they walked back along the trail, Matthew and Mark flanked Michael, bombarding him with questions about his life, his interests, his travels. Sarah walked a few meters behind, observing the interaction between the father and his sons. What surprised her most wasn't Michael's answers, but his patience. The man she had known was ambitious, always in a hurry, frequently distracted by work calls. This Michael answered each question with full attention, laughed at childish jokes, and seemed genuinely interested in every detail of the boys' lives. "Daddy," said Matthew suddenly, trying out the word for the first time. Michael stopped in. The middle of the trail visibly moved. "Yes? Can you visit us tomorrow too?" Michael looked at Sarah, seeking guidance. She nodded almost imperceptibly. "If your mummy allows, I'd love to," he answered. "And the day after tomorrow?" asked Mark. "Mark," Sarah gently intervened, "let's take it easy, okay?" But when she saw the expression on Michael's face, a mixture of gratitude, love, and something that looked very much like completeness, Sarah knew that her carefully constructed defenses were beginning to crumble. Perhaps, just perhaps, they could find a way back to each other. Not as the boyfriend and girlfriend they were, but as the family they could always have been. Dinner in the suite proceeded with a naturalness that surprised Sarah. Michael had insisted on ordering room service for everyone, and now he was sitting on the floor with Matthew and Mark, using the coffee table as support, while they ate sandwiches and French fries that the boys had chosen. "Daddy, do you eat like this on the floor at your house too?" asked Matthew, ketchup staining his chin. "No," Michael admitted, laughing. "Usually I eat alone at a large, formal table. This is much more fun." Sarah, sitting in the nearby armchair, observed the scene with contradictory feelings. Seeing Michael, adapting so easily to the organized chaos that was dinner with two 6-year-old children, stirred something deep in her heart. "Why do you eat alone?" asked Mark, always straight to the point. "Because there was no one to have dinner with me," Michael responded honestly. "That's sad," Mark declared with the simplicity of children. "It was," Michael agreed, looking briefly at Sarah. "But now, maybe I don't have to eat alone always." The insinuation didn't go unnoticed by Sarah, who felt her face heat up again. "Daddy, do you have toys at your house?" asked Matthew, changing the subject. "I don't. I never needed toys." "Everyone needs toys," Matthew declared with authority, "even adults. Mommy has a 1,000-piece puzzle that she does when she's nervous." Michael looked at Sarah with interest. "You still do puzzles?" "Sometimes," she responded, embarrassed to have this intimate detail exposed. "I remember you used to do one whenever you were stressed about your studies," Michael said softly. The mention of their shared past created a moment of silence loaded with memories. Sarah remembered how many times Michael had found her bent over the living room table, trying to fit small colored pieces together when the pressure of college became too intense. "Mommy also sings when she's happy," Mark added innocently. "But only when she thinks we're not listening." "Mark," Sarah exclaimed, mortified. "It's true," Matthew agreed. "She sings that song you used to sing to her before." Michael raised his eyebrows. "What song?" "I don't know the name," Matthew said, and began to hum a melody that made Sarah's heart stop. It was "At Last" by Etta James, the song Michael used to hum to her on lazy Sunday mornings when they would stay in bed planning the future that never came to be. "You remember that song?" Michael asked, clearly moved. "Mommy hums it all the time," Mark explained, "especially when she's fixing our room or making breakfast." Sarah felt like hiding under the earth. She had no idea she hummed that song so frequently, much less that the boys had noticed. "It's a beautiful song," Michael said, his voice slightly hoarse. "It means a lot to me. To us." "Did you dance to that song?" asked Matthew, always curious. Sarah saw Michael hesitate, looking at her as if asking permission to continue that line of conversation. "We did," she finally answered. Your daddy used to make me dance in the kitchen while we waited for dinner to be ready." "That's cool," exclaimed Matthew. "Can you teach us to dance, Daddy?" "If your mommy doesn't mind," Michael said carefully. "Mommy, you don't." "Mind, right?" Mark asked. Sarah looked at the 3 pairs of green eyes staring at her expectantly and knew she couldn't deny them. "I don't mind." Michael stood up and extended his hand to Matthew. "Let's go then. First you have to greet your dance partner." And so Sarah found herself watching Michael teach his sons to make a formal bow before dancing, explaining how to place one hand on the partner's waist and how to lead the steps. The boys laughed when they stepped on each other's feet, and Michael patiently corrected them, demonstrating the basic movements. "Now you two," Matthew said suddenly, pointing to Sarah and Michael. "You dance together." "No, honey, we don't." "Need to," Sarah said quickly. "But you know how to dance together," Mark insisted. "And we want to see." Michael extended his hand to her, a half smile on his face. "One dance. For the boys." Sarah hesitated. Accepting meant more than just dancing. It meant allowing an intimacy that she had avoided all day. "Please, Mommy," begged Matthew. "Just one song," she finally yielded, accepting Michael's hand. He gently pulled her to the center of the small free space in the room, and even without music, they began to move to the rhythm that their bodies still remembered. After all these years, the proximity was too intense. Sarah could smell his cologne, the warmth of his hand on her waist, the disturbing familiarity of their bodies moving in perfect synchrony. "You still dance wonderfully," Michael murmured near her ear. "Michael," she said softly, a warning for him not to cross the boundaries. "I know," he responded, "but thank you for this, for letting me be here." Matthew and Mark clapped their hands, laughing at their parents' performance. For them, it was just a fun moment. For Sarah and Michael, it was a painful reminder of everything they had lost. When the song ended, Sarah quickly moved away, going to the window under the pretext of checking the weather. "It's getting late," she announced. "Boys, let's get ready for bed." "But can Daddy stay a little longer?" asked Mark. "No, honey, Daddy has important things to do." Michael knelt to be at the boys' height. "Can I come back tomorrow?" "Yes," they exclaimed in unison. "Then see you tomorrow," he said, hugging each of them. Sarah noticed how he seemed to memorize every second of those hugs, as if storing them to make up for 6 years of absence. "Good night, Sarah," he said, as he headed for the door. "Thank you for today, for everything." She just nodded, not trusting her own voice. After Michael left, Sarah helped the boys prepare for bed, brushing teeth and putting on pajamas while they chatted about the day. "Mommy, Daddy is nice," said Matthew as she adjusted his blanket. "Yes, he is," Sarah agreed. "He seems different from what I imagined," Mark added. "How did you imagine him?" "More serious, more angry, but he laughs a lot and is affectionate." Sarah kissed the forehead of each son, wishing them good night. When they were finally asleep, she allowed herself a few minutes to process what had happened. Seeing Michael with the children had moved her in ways she hadn't expected. It wasn't just the natural way he interacted with them, but the visible transformation in him. The ambitious and frequently distracted man she had known had given way to someone present, patient, genuinely interested in every word the children said. Her phone vibrated with a text message. It was from Michael. "Sarah, I know it's late, but I need to say something. Seeing the 3 of you today, being with our family, was the best day of my life. I know I still have a lot to prove, but I want you to know that you all changed me. You completed me in a way I didn't even know I was incomplete. Sleep well, M." Sarah read the message 3 times before responding. It was a good day for them too. They liked you. Good night. It was a cautious response, but honest. And as she prepared for bed, Sarah admitted to herself something she had tried to deny all day. She had also liked the man Michael seemed to have become. The question that would keep her awake for a few more hours was whether this change was real and lasting, or just the temporary enthusiasm of a man discovering fatherhood. Only time would tell. But for the first time in 6 years, Sarah had a small hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to become a real family. The third day dawned cloudy, with strong winds announcing an approaching tropical storm. Sarah woke to the sound of rain beating on the window and found Matthew and Mark already awake, glued to the glass observing the agitated waves of the sea. "Mommy, will Daddy be able to come today with this rain?" asked Matthew, clearly disappointed. "I don't know, honey. We'll see if he calls." As if he had heard, the room phone rang. Sarah answered and heard Michael's familiar voice on the other end. "Good morning, Sarah. I saw the weather forecast. Are you all okay there?" "We are. The boys are worried if you'll be able to come today." "Of course I will. Actually, I was thinking, how about if you all come to my suite? It's larger, has a better view of the storm, and I can order a special breakfast for the children." Sarah hesitated. Going to his suite seemed a bigger step in the direction of an intimacy that she still wasn't sure she was ready to accept. "Mommy, what is he saying?" asked Mark, noticing her hesitation. "He wants you to have breakfast in his suite." "Can we?" asked Matthew, excited. Sarah looked at her children, saw the expectation on their faces, and yielded. "Okay, what's the number of your suite?" "Penthouse, top floor, direct elevator." 30 minutes later, Sarah and the boys were in front of the door of the resort's penthouse. When Michael opened it, Sarah was impressed by the contrast between her simple suite and that luxurious space. The penthouse was spacious, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the stormy ocean. "Wow," exclaimed Matthew, running to the window. "You can see everything from up here." "The waves are huge," Mark observed, slightly intimidated by the force of nature manifesting outside. Michael had prepared an elaborate breakfast: animal-shaped pancakes, creatively cut fruits, hot chocolate with marshmallows. Sarah noticed the effort he had made to make everything special for the children. "You did all this?" she asked, impressed. "I had help from the hotel kitchen," Michael admitted, "but I cut the fruits myself. I discovered that making apple stars is harder than it seems." The boys laughed at the imperfect shapes of the fruits, and Sarah found herself smiling at his determination to make everything perfect. As they ate, the storm outside intensified. Lightning illuminated the dark sky, and the wind made the palm trees bend dramatically. "It's getting ugly out there," Sarah commented, looking out the window. As if responding to her comment, a particularly strong lightning was followed by a deafening thunder that made Mark cringe and automatically seek his mother's lap. "It's all right, honey," Sarah consoled him. "It's just a storm." Michael noticed the boy's fear and approached. "Mark, can I tell you a secret about storms?" Mark nodded timidly. "When I was little, I was very afraid of thunder too. My grandfather taught me to count between the lightning and the thunder to know how far away the storm is. Want to learn?" And so Michael taught Mark the technique of counting the seconds between the flash of lightning and the sound of thunder, explaining that each 5 seconds represented approximately 1 kilometer of distance. Matthew was also interested, and soon both were counting along with their father, transforming fear into an educational game. 8 seconds, Matthew announced after a lightning. "That means it's quite far, right, Daddy?" "About 2 kilometers, Michael confirmed. "You're great at math." Sarah observed the scene with a tight heart. Seeing Michael consoling Mark and transforming fear into learning showed a paternal side that she had never imagined he possessed. The morning passed quickly between games, stories, and conversations. Michael had brought a real chess set and was teaching Mark the basic moves, while Matthew built towers with the building blocks that Michael had obtained from the hotel's recreation center. It was when Sarah was in the penthouse's American-style kitchen, preparing more hot chocolate, that she heard Matthew ask a question that made her freeze. "Daddy, why did Mommy cry sometimes when we were little?" Sarah hid behind the kitchen wall, holding her breath. "Cry?" Michael asked, clearly surprised. "Yes," Mark confirmed. "Sometimes when she thought we were sleeping, she cried, especially on Father's Day." Sarah closed her eyes, remembering those difficult first years when Michael's absence weighed more during commemorative dates. "And do you know why she cried?" Michael asked gently. "We thought it was because she missed you," Matthew answered with the brutal honesty of children. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah waited, her heart beating hard, for Michael's response. "You're probably right," he finally said, his voice loaded with emotion. "I did a lot of wrong things, boys, and one of the worst was making your mommy suffer." "But you can fix that now," said Mark with the simplicity of children. "Can I?" "Yes, you can," Matthew confirmed. "You just have to make Mommy smile more. She smiles a lot more since you showed up." Sarah felt tears burn her eyes. The boys had noticed something that she herself was trying to deny. "And do you think I can make Mommy happy?" Michael asked. "Of course," exclaimed Matthew. "You're already doing it. Yesterday she sang her song all day long." "And she didn't get nervous even once," Mark added. "Usually she gets nervous when there are a lot of new people around." Michael laughed softly. She was always shy with strangers. "But you're not a stranger," Matthew declared. "You're our daddy." Sarah couldn't hide anymore. She returned to the living room with watery eyes, trying to disguise that she had heard the conversation. "Fresh hot chocolate," she announced, but her voice came out hoarser than normal. Michael looked at her intensely, and she knew he had realized that she had heard everything. "Mommy, are you okay?" asked Mark, always attentive to her mood. "I am, honey. It's just, the storm makes me a bit melancholic." But when she looked out the window, she realized that the rain had diminished and the lightning was more spaced out. The storm was passing. "Look," Michael said, pointing outside. "I think we can already see a bit of blue in the sky." And there really was. A small opening in the clouds revealed a piece of blue sky, promising that the sun would soon shine again. "After the rain stops, the sun always comes out," Matthew observed philosophically. "It's true," Michael agreed, but his eyes were fixed on Sarah when he said it. The rest of the day proceeded in a lighter atmosphere. The storm passed completely by noon, and they went down to the beach, where the children had fun looking for shells that had been brought in by the strong waves. Michael had changed clothes again, swimming shorts and a simple t-shirt, and Sarah couldn't help but notice how relaxed he looked, genuinely happy, very different from the tense executive she had known. "Sarah," he said, when the children were at a distance, playing at the water's edge, "can I ask a question?" "You can." "Do you regret having raised them alone, not having looked for me when they were born?" Sarah thought carefully before answering. "I don't regret having raised them alone. They gave me strength I didn't know. I had, but—" She hesitated. "But?" "Sometimes I wonder how it would have been if you had stayed. If we would have managed to be a family." Michael stopped walking and stared at her. "Sarah, I know it's too late to go back. I know I can't undo the mistakes I made. But can I try to build something new from here on?" "Something new like what?" "Like a family. Not the same as what we planned before, but something that works for the four of us. Something real, built on honesty and true commitment." Sarah looked at Matthew and Mark, who were running after the waves, laughing loudly. Then she looked at Michael, saw the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability that he rarely showed. "Michael," she said slowly, "if we're going to try this, it has to be for real. It can't be a whim or a phase. These children have already suffered enough with your absence." "I know, and Sarah, it's not a whim. You three are the best thing that ever happened to me. I won't mess this up again." She studied him for a long moment, looking for signs of doubt or insincerity. But all she saw was determination and love. "Okay," she finally said, "let's try. Slowly, one day at a time." The smile that illuminated Michael's face was like the sun coming out from behind the clouds. And at that moment, Sarah allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they really could find a way to be happy together. After all, as Matthew had observed, after the storm always comes the sun. 3 months had passed since that stormy encounter at the resort. Sarah's apartment in New York City, which before housed only her and the twins, now received Michael almost daily. He had kept his promise to be present, adapting his executive schedule to never miss an important moment in the boys' lives. That Saturday morning, Sarah woke to the familiar sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. Going downstairs, she found Michael teaching Matthew and Mark to make pancakes, a tradition that had developed on weekends. "Mommy," exclaimed Matthew with flour on his face, Daddy is teaching us to make heart-shaped pancakes. And he said, "It's because he loves us," Mark added, smiling shyly. Sarah felt her heart quicken. In the last few months, Michael had proven to be a dedicated and present father, but they still hadn't defined exactly what they were as a couple. They slept in separate houses, had family dates, but avoided conversations about the romantic future between them. "Good morning," Michael said, looking at her with that smile that still made her stomach flutter. "Coffee?" "Please," she responded, accepting the cup he offered. It was then that Matthew, with his tendency to ask difficult questions, dropped the bomb. "Daddy, when are you going to live here with us for real?" Michael almost dropped the pancake he was flipping. Sarah felt her face burn. "Matthew," she began, "we've already talked about this." "But you like each other," Mark interrupted with his relentless logic. "And we like Daddy, and he likes us. Why can't he live with us?" Michael turned off the stove and faced the situation. "Boys, this is a complicated decision that adults need to—" "It's not complicated," Matthew interrupted him. "Either you want to be together or you don't." Sarah and Michael looked at each other over the children's heads, a silent communication loaded with years of history. "How about if you finish the pancakes while Mommy and I talk quickly?" Michael suggested. "You can talk here," Mark said. "We promise not to interrupt." "Yeah," Matthew agreed, "and that way we can give our opinion if you say something wrong." Despite the tension of the moment, Sarah couldn't contain a laugh. "Okay, but if you're going to give your opinion, then I'll be very direct." She turned to Michael, took a deep breath, and said the words she had been mentally rehearsing for weeks. "Michael, these have been the happiest 3 months of my life. Since they were born," she said, looking at the boys. "Seeing you with them, seeing how you've changed, how you've become the father they deserve. That showed me that you really are a different person now." Michael took a step toward her. "Sarah, let me finish," she interrupted him gently. "I love you. I always have. Even when I was furious, even when I thought I hated you. A part of me never stopped loving you." Michael's eyes filled with tears that he didn't try to hide. "Sarah, But," she continued, raising her hand, "if we're going to do this, if we're going to try to be a real family, I need to know that you're—" "Sure." "I need to know that you won't run away again when things get difficult." Michael moved closer, taking her hands in his. "Sarah, in these 3 months, I've learned what it means to have a real purpose. Every morning, I wake up thinking about you. 3, every day I make decisions thinking about what's best for our family." "Our family," she repeated, testing the words. "Our family," he confirmed. "Sarah, I resigned as CEO." "What?" she exclaimed, genuinely shocked. "Yesterday, I signed the papers yesterday. I'll continue as a majority shareholder, but I don't want the executive responsibility anymore. I want time. Time to be a father. Time to win you back. Time for us to build the life we should have always had." Matthew and Mark had stopped pretending they weren't paying attention and now observed the conversation with wide eyes. "Michael," Sarah said, her voice trembling, "you can't give up your career for us." "I'm not giving it up," he explained. "I'm reorganizing priorities. The company will continue functioning perfectly, but now under the direction of someone who doesn't have a family waiting for him at home." "At home?" she repeated. Michael smiled nervously and pulled a small box from his pocket. Sarah felt her heart stop. "Sarah Mitchell," he said, kneeling right there in the kitchen with pancakes burning on the griddle and 2 7-year-old children as witnesses. "Will you marry me?" "Daddy," Matthew exclaimed, "you forgot to ask her first if she wanted to be your girlfriend again." Michael laughed, still kneeling. "Matthew is right. Sarah, will you be my girlfriend, officially?" "Yes," she answered, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I want to be your girlfriend." "And will you marry me?" "Yes," she exclaimed, not even looking at the ring. "Yes, I want to marry you." Matthew and Mark exploded in shouts of joy, jumping around the kitchen like little madmen. Michael stood up and kissed Sarah for the first time in 6 years, a kiss salty with happy tears and sweet like the pancakes they had forgotten on the stove. "The ring," Mark shouted. She didn't even look at the ring. Michael and Sarah separated, laughing, and finally Sarah looked at the small velvet box. Inside was a simple but elegant ring with a classic solitaire diamond. "Michael, it's beautiful," she whispered. "It's not the same as the one I gave you years ago," he said, placing the ring on her finger. "This is new for a new beginning." "It's perfect," she said, admiring how the ring fit perfectly on her finger. "Now you're going to live together and I'll have my daddy here every day?" Matthew asked, still processing the implications. "If you want," Michael said, kneeling to be at the boy's height. "But that means I'm going to be a stricter daddy sometimes. I'll have to put you in time out when necessary. I'll have to say no to some things. Are you prepared for that?" "We are," they responded in unison. "And you know that it means I'll be here forever? That I'll never leave again?" "Promise?" Mark asked, that old vulnerability shining in his eyes. "I promise," Michael said solemnly. "I promise by our names, by my past mistakes, and by the love I feel for you three, I'll never leave again." Sarah observed Michael making that sacred promise to their children and knew deep in her heart that this time it was for real. 6 months later, in a small intimate ceremony on the beach where they had reunited, Michael and Sarah got married. Matthew was the ring bearer, and Mark read a speech that he had written himself about how cool it is to have a complete family. During the party, while watching Michael dancing with the boys on the sand, Sarah reflected on how life had taken unexpected turns. The man who had abandoned her pregnant had transformed into the father and husband she had always dreamed of having. "No regrets?" Michael asked, approaching her with Matthew and Mark in his arms. "None," she responded, kissing him softly. "Just gratitude." "Gratitude for what?" "For you having the courage to change, for coming back, for becoming the man I always knew you could be." Michael hugged her, with the children between them, and whispered in her ear, "Thank you for giving me a second chance, for letting me be part of our family." "Our family," she repeated, savoring the words, and there, on the beach where they had reunited by chance, surrounded by the children who had brought them back together, and by